My name is Linda. I'm 62, retired, and I live alone in the small house my late husband and I bought together over 35 years ago. It's nothing fancy, a cozy two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood in Pennsylvania. But it's mine. I keep it clean. I grow flowers in the backyard. I have a little white fence that needs painting, but I've never minded doing things myself. Life after my husband Paul passed away wasn't easy. He died 7 years ago from lung cancer, and not a day passes that I don't miss him. We never had children. I often imagine what kind of father he'd have been. Probably soft, the way he used to be with our dog, Gus. It was quiet in the house, but peaceful. Predictable. That's why I was surprised when my brother Tom called. Tom is my younger brother by 10 years. We've never been close. He was always the wild one, as Mom used to say, always quick to make trouble, and quicker to run from it. While I stayed local, went to work at the post office, married Paul, and built a life, Tom bounced between cities, jobs, and women. He called occasionally, usually when he was in trouble or needed money. So when his name lit up on my caller ID that Thursday morning, I sighed before I even picked up the phone. "Linda," he said, voice soft, rehearsed. "I need a place to stay, just for a month." I swear he told me some story about getting kicked out of his girlfriend's apartment. Something about her being jealous and crazy. He said he'd already tried couch surfing with friends, but didn't want to be a burden to them. "Your family," he added, as if that word had ever meant much to him. I hesitated. Everything inside me told me not to say yes, but I could hear something in his voice, maybe desperation, or maybe I just imagined it, the kind of desperation that makes someone take advantage of kindness. "Just 1 month," I said finally. "That's it, Tom. I'm serious." He arrived the next evening. One duffel bag, a backpack, and a phone charger. That was it. "I'll be out before you even miss having the house to yourself." He smiled, kissed my cheek, and walked in like he already belonged. That night, as I lay in bed listening to his footsteps pacing in the guest room, I told myself I was doing the right thing. He was my brother, and surely 1 month wasn't going to ruin anything. I had no idea how wrong I was. At first, Tom kept his word, or at least he appeared to. The first week, he was polite. He washed his dishes, even made us both coffee one morning. He talked about finding a job, maybe something local to get back on his feet. I didn't press. I wanted to believe he meant it. I wanted to believe people could change, even people like Tom. But I noticed the little things. He slept until noon most days, even though he claimed he was applying online. I never saw him touch the computer in the guest room, and I knew he wasn't using the old laptop I left in there for guests. Instead, he was glued to his phone. He'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, scrolling, snickering, texting, lighting up cigarettes on the back porch, even though I asked him not to smoke near the house. By the second week, dishes started piling up in the sink. I'd wake up to empty pizza boxes and beer cans on the counter, even though I don't drink. He'd left the front door unlocked once. When I brought it up, he brushed me off with a laugh. "No one's robbing this place, Linda. It's the suburbs." He began disappearing at odd hours. I never asked where he went, but once he came home with a woman I'd never seen before. She looked half his age, dressed like she was going clubbing, and didn't even acknowledge me as they breezed past the living room to the guest room. I sat in my recliner, knitting needles frozen in my hands, listening to their laughter muffled by the thin walls. The next morning, she was gone, and Tom acted like nothing happened. "Do you remember when we were kids?" he said casually over coffee. "And you used to rat me out to Mom for sneaking out?" I looked up from my mug. "Because you were always sneaking out." He smiled. "Still the same, huh?" I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but something in his tone made my stomach turn. I tried to maintain boundaries, cooking only for myself, locking my bedroom door at night. But my home no longer felt like mine. There were strangers on the other side of the wall, smells I didn't recognize, music thumping from his room at all hours. I told myself to wait, just a couple more weeks. He said a month. Maybe he'd keep his word. Still, something deep inside whispered that Tom had never once kept his word. Not to me, not to anyone. The third week began with a broken lamp. It was the small one in the hallway, a gift from Paul on our last anniversary. The base was cracked clean through, the shade dented like someone had knocked it over and stepped on it. When I noticed it the next morning, I found the pieces swept into a pile by the wall, like someone had started cleaning it up, but got bored halfway through. I stood there staring at it for a long time, hands trembling. When I brought it up over breakfast, Tom didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah, sorry about that. Me and a friend were looking for the bathroom in the dark. I guess we bumped it. You should move it somewhere safer, maybe. That corner's too tight." I blinked. "You had a guest again?" He finally looked at me, smirking. "You were asleep. Didn't want to wake you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and quietly cleaned up the mess myself. Later that day, while folding laundry in my room, I realized something else. My bedroom door, which I always locked when I left the house, wasn't fully closed. I hadn't been in there since morning. My jewelry box was slightly ajar. Nothing seemed missing, but I couldn't shake the sick feeling that someone had been inside. My space. My sanctuary. That evening, I waited until Tom came back from wherever he'd gone and asked, gently, if he'd been in my room. He didn't get angry. That would have been easier. Instead, he acted hurt. "Wow," he said, tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter. "You think I'm stealing from you now? That's messed up, Linda." "I didn't say that," I replied, already shrinking into myself. My door was open." "Maybe you forgot to lock it. You're not getting any younger, sis." That sentence cut deeper than he probably realized. Or maybe he did realize. I never knew with Tom. He dropped the subject with a dramatic sigh and walked off, leaving me to sit alone in the kitchen with my heart pounding and my appetite gone. The next 2 days, things only worsened. I came home from the grocery store to find the house filled with loud music, laughter, and the smell of something burning. 4 strangers, 2 women and 2 men, none older than 30, lounged on my couch and kitchen stools, drinking out of red cups. My living room looked like a frat house. Tom sauntered out of the hallway, grinning like this was all perfectly normal. "Hey, thought I'd have a few friends over. They're cool, don't worry." I froze. One of the men gave me a nod and tipped his drink toward me like I was a waitress. I said nothing. I simply backed out of the room, groceries still in my hands, and went to my bedroom. I locked the door. This time, I double-checked it. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not out of fear, but out of shame. Shame that I had let my home become this. Shame that I was too weak to stop it. Shame that the one person left from my family, the only one still breathing, was the one destroying the only peace I had. Still, I said nothing, but a storm was building inside me. I didn't know it then, but something was changing, slowly, quietly, like a fault line, just waiting to snap. By the time the 4th week rolled around, Tom had stopped pretending to be a guest. He no longer offered small courtesies. No good morning, no thanks for dinner, not even a glance when I walked into a room. He strutted around like the place belonged to him, like I was the one imposing. He started using my car without asking. It began with him borrowing it one afternoon while I was napping. He left a note on the counter that simply said, "Took the car, back soon." I stood in the driveway in my house slippers, clutching my keys, which were still hanging by the door, and feeling utterly violated. He had taken the spare, Paul's key, the one I hadn't touched in years. When he returned hours later, music blasting, windows down, and the gas tank nearly empty, I finally snapped, at least a little. "You can't just take my car, Tom," I said, as he waltzed past me, unfazed. "Relax," he muttered. "It was just sitting there." "It's not yours." "Well, I don't see you driving it anywhere. You barely go out." I wanted to scream, "Because I'm afraid to leave my house now." But the words lodged in my throat like a stone. He disappeared into the bathroom and shut the door. Conversation over. The next day, my neighbor Janet, who lives 2 houses down and walks her dog past my place each morning, caught me while I was watering the front bushes. "Everything all right, Linda?" she asked gently, shielding her eyes from the sun. I paused, unsure how to answer. I just... I noticed some new faces coming and going, and your lights were on until 3 a.m. the other night. I thought maybe you were having family over." I forced a smile. "Just my brother. He's staying with me for a bit." Janet nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Well, if you ever need anything, you know I'm right here." Her kindness almost broke me, but the shame wouldn't let me speak. That weekend, the house was louder than ever. Music blasted for 2 days straight. Tom invited more people, and at one point, I counted 7 unfamiliar cars parked along the curb. I stayed in my bedroom, reading the same paragraph of a mystery novel for 3 hours, while strangers laughed in my kitchen and used my bathroom like it was theirs. On Sunday night, I ventured into the kitchen after they'd finally left. The place was a disaster. Sticky counters, spilled beer, cigarette butts floating in a half-full coffee mug. One of my dining chairs was broken. I stood there, frozen, until I noticed a red plastic cup sitting on the piano bench, my late husband's piano. I walked over, trembling, and picked it up. The condensation had left a ring on the wood. Paul always kept that bench spotless. He used to play after dinner while I knitted, the two of us in our own quiet rhythm. Now it was just me, standing alone in a ruined kitchen, holding a stranger's garbage. I don't know what changed in that moment, but something hardened. That night, I pulled out a notebook and made a list. Not a diary, not a letter. A list of everything that was no longer acceptable. Everything he'd broken. Everything I wanted back. And at the top, I wrote, in shaky handwriting, "This is my house." I kept the list in my nightstand drawer. Every morning before my feet touched the floor, I added to it. Paul's lamp, broken. Piano bench, stained. Dining chair, cracked. Privacy, gone. Respect, missing. Joy, fading. It wasn't just objects. It was my peace, my air, my dignity. Every word I wrote helped me feel a little more alive, a little more certain. Tom, meanwhile, acted as if I were invisible. One morning, I caught him using my toothbrush. When I walked into the bathroom and saw it in his hand, he didn't flinch. He even laughed. "What?" He shrugged, mouth foamy. "It's not like I have cooties." I didn't answer. I turned and walked straight out. My legs trembled under me. I went to the drugstore that afternoon and bought a new toothbrush and a lock for my bedroom door. That same evening, he brought someone else over. A man this time, tall and loud, who called me sweetheart when I passed through the living room to grab a cup of tea. "I'm not your sweetheart," I said, the words escaping before I could swallow them. Tom looked up from the couch. "Geez, Linda, you're getting uptight lately." Uptight. That word hung in the air like a moldy curtain. I didn't speak again, but I made my tea slowly, forcing them to see me, to be uncomfortable with my silence. It didn't work. They kept laughing. I went to my room and locked the door, pressing my back against it like a teenager sneaking a phone call. Later that night, I heard Tom on the phone, pacing the hallway. "She's acting weird," he said. "Like, controlling. I'm just trying to help her not die of boredom." He laughed. A low, ugly laugh. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't cry either. Instead, I pulled out my notebook again, and this time, I wrote something new at the bottom of the list. Step 1. Start looking into my legal rights. The next morning, I went to the library. I hadn't been there in years. It still smelled like paper and quiet, just like it used to. I walked past the mystery novels and large print section and sat at a public computer. My hands shook slightly as I typed in the search bar, evicting a family member in Pennsylvania. The results were overwhelming. Legal forms, tenant laws, horror stories. Too many tabs, too much jargon. But one sentence stood out to me on a state website. Even if there is no lease, someone living in your home for more than 30 days may have rights as a tenant. 30 days. Tom had been here 31. I printed what I could understand and folded the papers into my purse. On the way out, I saw Janet again walking her dog. I almost turned away, but something in me stopped. "Janet?" I called. She smiled. "Linda, I was just thinking about you." I hesitated, then said, "Would you want to come over for coffee sometime?" Her face lit up. "Absolutely." It felt like taking a brick off my chest. That afternoon, I replaced the bathroom lock with one that could only be opened with a key. I didn't ask Tom. I didn't tell him. I just did it. When he asked about it later, half laughing, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You don't need to use that bathroom anymore." He narrowed his eyes. "You trying to push me out, Linda?" I didn't answer. I let the silence speak. He scoffed and walked away, but not before muttering something under his breath. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. That night, I added a new section to my notebook. Legal steps to reclaim my home. I listed everything I'd learned. Notice requirements, possible police involvement, documentation of behavior. It wasn't much, but it was a plan. And for the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. Janet came over for coffee 2 days later. I served it in my mother's old china cups, something I hadn't done since Paul's funeral. We sat in the sunroom. I'd cracked a window open for the breeze, and for a moment, it almost felt like life had returned to normal. Janet looked around and said gently, "This used to be the most peaceful house on the block." I nodded. "I'm trying to get it back." That opened the door. I told her everything, not in dramatic waves, but like slowly unraveling a tight knot. The parties, the car, the strangers, the toothbrush. I even showed her the list. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, hands wrapped around her cup, her eyes soft but alert. When I finished, she reached over and gently placed her hand over mine. "You don't deserve this," she said. Those words undid me, not because I didn't know them, but because someone else finally said them out loud. She offered to help however she could, whether that meant giving a statement, helping me file paperwork, or just being there. I felt like I had an army, even if it was just one person. That night, I made a copy of everything in the notebook, just in case. I hid one copy inside a folder labeled Recipes in the kitchen. The other I placed in my purse. I even started taking photos on my phone when he left messes, or when unknown cars parked out front. But Tom noticed something had changed. He became colder, not louder, quieter, more calculating. He didn't bring people over for 2 days straight. Instead, he hovered. He sat in the kitchen longer. He lingered by the door when I was on the phone. He asked who I was texting. When I told him it was none of his business, his jaw tightened. "Are you spying on me?" he said. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm documenting." He laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. It was something darker. He stood up from the table and leaned in, close. Too close. "I don't think you realize what you're starting," he said. "I think I do," I replied. That night, I locked my bedroom door and slid a chair under the handle. I knew I was getting close to something, but I also knew that meant danger. The next morning, my car tires were flat. All four of them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called Janet, and then I called the police. The officer who arrived was younger than I expected, probably younger than Tom, with a calm face and cautious tone. He walked around the car, took notes, and asked if I had any idea who might have done it. I told him I suspected my brother. "Do you have any proof?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but I'm working on it." I showed him the notebook, the photos of parties, the logs of noise complaints, and my copy of the legal paperwork about evicting a family member. He nodded, slow and careful. "It's good you're documenting everything. That's important. But I have to be honest. Without evidence, I can't press charges. I can't even make him leave right now." I knew that, but hearing it still stung. He gave me a card and told me to call if anything else happened. "We can do a wellness check anytime, ma'am," he said, "even just to make sure you feel safe." I thanked him. After he left, Janet stayed with me while I called a tow truck. Tom didn't come home until after midnight. I was still up. The porch light was on. I didn't speak when he walked in. He glanced at the car, then at me. "Flat tires, huh?" he said, grinning like a child who knew he wouldn't be punished. "I called the police," I replied. That wiped the smirk off his face. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped. "You call the cops on your own brother?" I stared at him. "You stopped being a brother a long time ago." He paced the kitchen, hands in his hair, muttering things I couldn't quite hear. I stayed silent. My calm was disarming him, more than any screaming ever could. "You think you're gonna win this?" he finally barked. "You think you can just get rid of me?" "I don't think," I said softly. "I know." He stormed into the guest room and slammed the door. I barely slept, but I felt no fear. I was tired of fear. The next morning, I filed the eviction notice at the courthouse. It was terrifying, standing at that window with shaking hands and a pit in my stomach. But I did it. 30 days. That's what the paperwork said. 30 days to vacate. When I came home, the guest room door was wide open. Empty hangers swayed in the closet. The drawers had been pulled out, clothes scattered across the floor. But Tom was gone. I checked the driveway. His friend's beat-up truck was gone too. Relief swept over me for a brief, glorious second. But then I noticed something else. The frame on the mantel, the photo of Paul and me in our garden, was gone. And on the table beside it, scratched in pen across one of my recipe books, were 4 words: "You started this war." For days after Tom left, I lived in a strange kind of limbo. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. I kept checking windows twice, locking the doors even during the day. My sleep was restless. Any noise outside, a car slowing down, a footstep on the sidewalk, made my heart thud in my chest. I changed the locks. Janet's son came over to install a camera above the front door. I didn't ask for it, he just did it. He said his mom told him what I'd been through. I thanked him with tears in my eyes and a fresh-baked peach cobbler. I didn't tell anyone how often I caught myself walking past the empty guest room, half expecting to find it trashed again or hear his voice. I'd pause in the hallway sometimes, listening to nothing at all. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I didn't answer, but it left a voicemail. I played it once, then twice. Just his voice, breathing. Then, softly, "You think this is over?" That was all. I saved it. I emailed a copy to myself and to Janet. I reported it the next morning. The officer, same young man as before, took it seriously this time. "Keep everything documented," he said. "If he shows up, call us immediately." I nodded. But deep inside, I already knew. He would come back. It was a Tuesday. Overcast. Quiet. I just returned from the market and was putting away groceries when I heard the front door handle jiggle. I froze. Then I heard it. His voice. "Linda, open the door. I just want to talk." I didn't move. I walked to the living room, heart pounding, and checked the camera feed on my phone. There he was, standing on my porch, hoodie up, a bag slung over his shoulder. Face calm. Too calm. "I'm not here to fight," he said through the door, as if I'd invited him. I pressed record on my phone. "You're trespassing, Tom. You're not welcome here. The police have been notified." He chuckled. "Come on. You're gonna call the cops on your own brother? Again?" "I already did," I said. A beat passed. Then, pounding, 3 angry bangs against the door. "You think you're better than me now?" he shouted. "You always thought you were better." I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the windows. 2 officers arrived. Calm, efficient. They spoke to Tom outside while I stayed locked in. Then they escorted him off my property. One came to the door afterward. "We warned him," the officer said. "He shows up again. You call. Next time, it's jail." I nodded. That night, I found the missing photo of Paul on my porch, slipped inside a torn manila envelope. No note. Just the photo. A quiet surrender, or maybe just an ending. I lit a candle by the piano, placed the photo back in its frame, and turned on Paul's favorite song. The house was quiet again. This time, for good.